I think most of you probably saw my newsletter or our newsletter that I wrote that went out, and I acknowledged that the note from Dan, part of it was rather long this week, but it felt like things that needed to be said. I've been, as you may have noticed or may not have noticed, in the prior couple of newsletters, kept them very kind of functional and informational. Just this is what we're doing. Here's the new schedule. Here's how to do interview. Here's the times that you can set. Please invite people. And that was a deliberate choice. And one in a way of self-preservation, I suppose, or self-protection, which we should probably talk about a little bit, and this talk should touch on that. And also one of, I just felt the need to be restrained as we're all adjusting to not seeing each other physically, to different edicts coming down from the government, from different biases and political points of view coming into what I would argue is a scientific conversation, not a political one. And a lot of voices out there too, talking about the silver lining. I think I mentioned that a week or two ago. And I just felt the need to be more measured in the response. And then finally this week, I started feeling a little freer to going, hey, here's what's up and here's what's possible for us as practitioners. And here's what it might mean. So that's an equally long way of saying sorry for the long email, but I just wanted to give you some context for this week's newsletter and kind of the difference in the prior 2 weeks, or maybe 3 weeks. So I wanted to revisit a koan that I think we touched on a month or 2 or 3 ago. Case 30 in the Mumonkon, or the Gateless Gate. Case 30, mind is Buddha. And the case reads, Taibai asked Baso in all earnestness, what is Buddha? Baso answered, the very mind is Buddha. The very mind is Buddha. The commentary on this, there's always the case, the commentary, and the verse in the Mumonkon. And I'm just going to read these so you get them exactly as they are without Shiro's commentary. Mumon's commentary is, if you grasp it on the spot, you wear Buddha's clothes, eat Buddha's food, speak Buddha's words, do Buddha's deeds. You are Buddha himself or herself. Though this may be so, Taibai has alas misled not a few people into mistaking the mark on the balance for the weight itself. How can he realize that even the mere mention of the word Buddha should make a person rinse his or her mouth for 3 days? If one is such a person, when he hears someone say, the very mind is Buddha, he or she will cover their ears and run away. There's a lot in there. The verse, I really wanted to spend some time with the verse today. The blue sky, the bright day, it is most detestable to hunt around. If furthermore you ask, what is Buddha? It is like shouting your innocence while holding the lute. It is like shouting your innocence while holding the lute. So the case again, Taibai asked Baso in all earnestness, what is Buddha? Baso answered, the very mind is Buddha. So what's going on here? There's actually a lot going on, because we come into this practice of Zen, and there's a historical story of Buddha. We've walked through some of those stories. I've pointed a few of you to Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Big Thick Book, which is the story of Buddha. So there is the historical tale of Buddha, Buddha as a prince, that said, no, this isn't working for me, and walked away from worldly riches and family and position, and ended up sitting down under a tree and experiencing enlightenment. There's a historical Buddha. But then, and you've heard me say this many times before, we are all Buddha. You are Buddha, right? Well, now obviously you can't be that person from 26 or 2,700 years ago. So what do we mean by that? You are Buddha. We are Buddha. We are bodhisattvas. Enlightenment is your birthright. It's already here. There's nothing to gain. What are you searching for? You are already Buddha, right? And this koan points to that. The very mind is Buddha. The mind is Buddha. Now, to understand this, we need to be a little Zen about it. The very mind is Buddha. In our Western understanding, we tend to think of the mind as this organ here that is a special and distinct thing. In Buddhism and Zen Buddhism in particular, the mind is often described as a sixth sense, right? So we've got touch, taste, smell, sight, hearing. Was that 5? Yeah, that was 5. And then mind as a sixth sense, right? So what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? And I had in the last week, I mean, it's kind of wonderful. We talked about beginner's mind a couple of weeks ago. It's kind of wonderful when you can have this moment again, right? When you can have that moment again where you go, oh, I think that was it. I think I just saw it, right? But this sense of mind is starting to understand, starting to experience the world as it is, right? Because in one sense, well, in a profound sense, without our senses, there is no world, because that is our only way of experiencing it. We touch it, we hear it, we smell it, we taste it, right? Or we perceive it, and we perceive it, right? So when I look out across the room and see the patio, on one hand, the patio just exists. The plants on the patio are there. In another sense, how can they be there if I don't perceive them? Right? I mean, it's my very perception of the plants on the patio that bring them to life as the world I'm experiencing. And then to go even a little loopier on it, perhaps, the only reason I can say I have sight, and I can say I have touch, and I can say I have mind, and I can say I have hearing, is because the jet flies overhead and I hear it. How would I know that I hear it if it wasn't there flying overhead? Okay. Now, if you really sit with that, if you really be with that, if you can really, through Zazen and taking Zazen into your life, start to experience your life that way, it can be a really beautiful thing moment by moment. Because hearing arises because there is sound. Sound arises because there is hearing. Seeing arises because there is sight. I know I have sight because I can see. And if you really dive into that with great determination, great doubt, and great faith, everything just comes together. It just comes together in perfection, right? So in my note to the world, or the 195 people on our list, as it constitutes the world, I talked about this period we're in and my own doubts in it. Like, damn, this isn't working. Like, aren't I supposed to be the peaceful Buddhist priest, right? How am I supposed to help communicate this and do interview with people and help, right? How am I supposed to do this with all this turmoil that I am in, right? Where do I find that peace? Where do I find that equanimity? Where do I find that oneness, right? What's happening? How come I can't find it, right? And then if I'm lucky, I look out and see the lavender and it just is, right? I think I told the story of the last night of Session that Lori Tennessee and I were just up at, and I reached a moment of great doubt, just working on a koan and trying to figure it out, and you know, what is my place in all of this, and I couldn't sleep, and I just decided, okay, I'm going to go be Buddha. I'm going to go be historical Buddha. And I snuck into the Zendo up in the mountain, and it was dark, and I had my iPhone as a flashlight, and I found a cushion, and trying to recreate that story, but just also searching for peace. And like, I'm going to sit here on this cushion, and I don't care if I sit here till I die, but I'm going to sit here till I figure this out. I'm going to sit here until I find the answer. Now, the historical Buddha did that for 7 years, and then finally for roughly 7 days under the Bodhi tree. I think I lasted 2.5 or 3 hours. But where I really ended up with that was with a smile on my face, going, "Oh yeah, that's right. This is it. Just sitting here is it. There's nothing to find, right? There's nothing to find." And Suzuki Roshi in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind talks about this, and when he talks about right effort, sometimes the effort is just the effort. The practice is the practice, as I wrote. And the beauty is in that itself. There is nothing to attain. I play my role in this, but I don't have anything to give you because you already have everything. You have your 6 senses. You have your experience of the world, right? And on one hand, that lets the teacher off the hook. And on the other hand, it just is a much sharper, bigger hook, right? Because it lets you off the hook in terms of I'm supposed to have the answers, but it puts you very definitely in the space of holding the space, right? And it's not just for the teacher, that's for all of us. That's for Chalet and her interactions with the people that she's interacting with. That's for Arden Marsh. We are all on the hook with our vows and our practice for holding that space, for being Buddha, for remembering that the moment is the moment. And a shout out to Marsh, who's her practice right now is Shikantazu, which is just sitting, right? No koans, no measure of advancement, no measure of failure, no measure. She's committed to just sitting. Just sitting. The practice is the practice. This is my embodiment of Buddhahood, of enlightenment, of being a bodhisattva, is I'm going to sit. And it's a good thing to try every once in a while, is to drop the koan, to drop the desire to find something, to just sit. You know, it's all everywhere, all around us in the practice. The Paramita Heart Sutra, you know, the first chant that we do. Form is exactly emptiness, emptiness exactly form. Sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness are likewise like this. That's talking about that collapsing of the six senses that I spoke to earlier, right? Form is exactly emptiness, emptiness is exactly form. And it talks about the six senses, sensation and conception, discrimination, awareness, right? And then it goes on to say, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. No color, sound, smell, taste, touch phenomena. No realm of sight, no realm of consciousness. No ignorance and no end to ignorance. No old age and death and no end to old age and death. And so if you just revisit, you know, the sutra, it's there as well. So why is this current period so challenging? Well, first of all, we're removed from each other, and there is something in physical presence, and you know, whether you're touching or not, you know, there is actually in physical proximity, there's an energetic exchange that we get, right? And right now, you know, 6 feet is as close as we get, I guess, right? I know for me, there's a choice too of what do I sense? What do I choose to sense? And I will admit to freely overdosing on the news and media in the last couple of weeks. And so what does that create, right? It creates an experience of the world, right? Because right here, right now, what our death toll in the United States is compared to Italy's, and what that means in terms of mortality rates versus, you know, population density, and how that compares to China, and whether China reported their numbers accurately or not, and who knew what when, and who's doing what when, appropriately or inappropriately, right? Even what my friends in New Mexico are experiencing versus my friends here, right? Right here, right now with us, that's a story that has no relevance to right here, right now. Or it's not creating the right here, right now. But if I go right after this talk and dive into my Apple News feed, all of a sudden that becomes my experience of the world. And I'm not suggesting that we remain uninformed or that we deliberately avoid that. But I think it is important to choose how much. I know it is for me. I know it is for me. There's been a lot of stories lately about how people are hypo-dreaming right now. Like everybody, a lot of people in lockdown are experiencing almost a hyperactive state of dreaming, right? And I always have a fairly active dream state. I love my dreams. They're very entertaining and a lot of fun. But this morning, I wear this Garmin watch pretty much all the time to go with my training, but it also tracks as well as it can sleep and sleep patterns. And I decided to take a look this morning. And sure enough, it's like tracking with the news stories, essentially, right? Because my sleep pattern right now is go to bed. There's like an hour and a half to 2 hours of truly deep sleep. And then I cycle through the rest of the night through high REM state and then light sleep, and then high REM state and light sleep. And so this corresponds with a lot of very active dreaming, right? And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting because my own pattern on my own data is reflecting what's being reported in the news about how we're all responding to this. And so I went back into the history to see how it was different. And my typical sleep pattern is generally go into some period of deep sleep and then cycle between REM and light, but not as much REM. I'm like in 3.5 hours of REM state now per 7 hours, like almost half the time. And then I thought, well, this is interesting. So I went back to Sesshin because like I can go back to like that 7 days and look at that specifically. This was really interesting because in Sesshin for 7 days, the schedule is get up, an hour and a half of Zazen, eat breakfast in silence, go rest, do work practice where there's some communication, an hour and a half of Zazen, eat lunch in silence, rest by yourself silently. An hour and a half of Zazen might be a Dharma talk in there, right? Little bit of rest, dinner in silence, an hour and a half of Zazen, a half an hour to clean up, and lights out. And when I go and do Sesshin, I'm pretty rigorous with it. I don't take my Kindle, so I don't read the Murakami novel that I'm reading. And I will look at my koans, but I won't do anything else. I just dedicate my time to Sesshin. And when I looked at the sleep patterns there, it looked like this. Deep sleep, a little bit of REM. Deep sleep, a little bit of light sleep. Deep sleep, a little bit of REM. I mean, it's a remarkable difference if you just look at the pattern. So, what does this suggest is that the inputs have huge significance. If our mind is one of our 6 senses, let's pay close attention to what we're doing with our mind. Let's use Zazen. Let's use the practice. Remember that the practice is the practice. And that at least for right now, we can claim that. For right now, that's our little piece of oneness and our little piece of peace and equanimity that is always available to us as practitioners of Zazen. The very mind is Buddha, is enlightenment. And there's some clues if you end up working on this koan in the commentary about perhaps a presentation. If you grasp this on the spot, you wear Buddha's clothes. You could substitute enlightenment in there. You wear enlightenment's clothes, eat enlightenment's food, speak Buddha's words, do Buddha's deeds. You are Buddha himself. If you grasp it on the spot, now this is talking about our lives. You wear Buddha's clothes, eat Buddha's food, speak Buddha's words, do Buddha's deeds. You are Buddha itself. And so this is a manner of holding our everyday lives in a sacred way. So that even in lockdown, when we go prepare a cup of tea or clean the house or feed our family or whatever we're doing, but the answer is right there, because there is no answer, or there is an answer, right? It is this. It's everything we're doing. The mind is Buddha. Touch, taste, smell, hearing, mind. It's all enlightenment, and it's all available at any moment. So I think I'll stop there. And I appreciate your hearing and listening, at least, and your mind on this. I'm going to switch to gallery mode so that I can. No, I'll keep it right here. But any questions or comments? You can go ahead and unmute yourself, and let's see how this works. Questions, comments, observations?
I mean, I'll just say that the language, I think, is just interesting if you grasp this on the spot, like, and also non-grasping. So obviously they point to two different things, but it's just interesting.
Can you repeat that a little more loudly, Tennessee?
Oh yeah, I just thought that the language, if you grasp this on the spot,
oh yes,
you know, and then you compare that with like the non-grasping, it's obviously they point to two different meanings, but I just find it interesting that the language is the same.
Yeah.
So I was just noticing that.
Yeah. Yeah, Zen's full of that, right? The dharmas are boundless. I vow to master them, right? You know. Anybody else?
Yeah, Dan. One thing that stood, great talk. I love all the different parts, but one thing that really stood out to me was you referring to Marsha's practice right now, Shikantaza, of just sitting and not necessarily working on getting somewhere, just in like being. And that really hit home for me, especially during this time now, because I feel like me and a lot of people are putting pressure on ourselves to like get things done. You know, I should be doing all the things that I've been meaning to do. I should be cleaning the house. I should be, you know, and what I find is it has been best for me during this time is to just let myself be, you know, just, just sit and just be. So that really resonated for me for just like what's happening right now, kind of for the collective consciousness.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak to that as well.
Can you hear Lori?
Can you guys hear me? I think that it actually takes a great deal of courage, at least from where I sit in life. I find myself in action. Just was raised in dance and movement. And so I find my expression in action. But of course, there's a choice around action. And so I realize that when I'm feeling really good and that kind of buzz where you're kind of part of the earth and you lose yourself in it, that's to me a right action. That's still in that place of just honoring self and the experience of this time. And I was just thinking, actually, I know you're not supposed to think while you're sitting, but I was recognizing that there are things about this time that I will miss. And I just wanted to put that out there as something we might, if we aren't already, just find a space where that exists for us so that we can really honor this opportunity.
Thanks, Lori.
Sure.
Laura, I want to just respond to that. I have been feeling about the fact that I'm able to be still and okay in this moment. And like, I even said this to Shiro an interview, and I'm like, oh my God, I have to like email him back and say that was so wrong. But like, I think about Andrea and her experience, and then I'm like, who am I to sit here and say that I'm welcoming the quiet and that I'm doing great? Like I'm just in conflict with the death and the destruction and what we're seeing. And then I'm like, but wait, is it okay that I'm so grounded and my life is not disrupted in the same way? So I'm actually struggling with the fact that I will probably miss some of this. And then I have a hard time reconciling that with people on the front lines. So that's just a struggle that I'm having.
Well, I just want to offer, for me, what comes up there, having been in conversation with Andrea over text and sometimes on the phone, she's really struggling with, the human component of fear, on a survival level. I'm sure she would be saying this for herself. And I think that each one of us may have had a moment where we're, oh my God, is that a sore throat? Oh, is that a dry cough? I mean, I think that we're all having some moment, or maybe some night in the middle of the night, where we're having these thoughts. And so I think we all share it on a level that's equal. And remember that we choose our lives, and we know we chose this life, we chose to be here. I mean, and we're going into our experiences with everything that we could have ever brought to it. And I think, rather than to feel guilt of any sort, I think it's better to serve Andrea by being your true self, and remember her in your prayers and your good thoughts, and you picture her in the light, and do what you can, but don't feel bad. And I hope that's helpful. Tennessee.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I mean, I can definitely relate to that conflict, but as you were speaking, I also felt like, wow, how much importance there is in feeling that way, in us feeling that way, in us holding those of us who can, and holding some kind of sanity for the planet, for the earth right now. And there's so much insanity. Like, we have to, not guard isn't the right word, but like be rooted for all of the madness that is happening on the front lines. And so I think it's good, and I don't think that we need to feel bad. I mean, I totally relate to that conflict. So, easier said than done. But just as you were talking, I was thinking, wow, like for those of us who can, we need to not get carried away in all the fear and panic, and just be in this space.
Yeah, and I want to add in there, and I think Chalet wants to say something, but I want to add in there that part of this feeling that's being described comes from thinking about how we're feeling and attaching some meaning to it, because there's a should in there. Maybe I shouldn't be feeling this way. Well, no, you're feeling this way. This is your life, right? And this works both ways. The last line of this verse, right? If furthermore you ask what is Buddha, it is like shouting your innocence while holding the lute, right? And that points to, if you've got it, you've got it. If you see it, you see it. If you don't, you don't, right? But be exactly where you're being. And so Tall and Tennessee, that space of seeing clearly and being at peace and being able to hold that space is so important. And to deny that, right, is like proclaiming your innocence while holding the lute, right? And another way of putting that is the greatest perpetration of all is saying you don't get it, right? And for those of us practicing, and for those of us with people around us, if you get it, Philip, and you got a smile on your face, keep smiling, right? Don't worry that your friends are going, what's the matter with that guy? right? This is our job, is to be Buddha, to be at peace. And so whenever we find ourselves questioning where we're at, right? That's a discursive thought. That is a thought layered on top of experience. That is not the experience itself. And our teaching and what we're supposed to be helping other people find is that the experience is the experience, is the experience, is the experience, and it'll be followed by another experience, right? But this is it. And so Tal, that's your experience. And when you do make it out to the market, I guarantee that just is exuding from you as you walk through your 6-foot bubble. It's like people see it, feel it, and it is peace to other people as well. Chalet, did you? I got you.
Yeah, actually, you ended up saying what the point I was going to make, and I was, I guess, thinking I had a similar thought for myself at one point. Criminy, I mean, there are people really suffering, and I'm just right now just feeling, and you've all seen me get weepy over this, just so grateful that I have something that I can use in my practice to bring me to such a good place, and or to help me remain in a good place too, I should say. And when I did have those thoughts, I had to come back to the other side of that is, thank goodness, there are people in a good state, because they're the ones who are going to help pull the other people up, or help, inspire them maybe that they can feel better or find a way to feel better. And sometimes it's just, I don't know, just not just being a good example, but maybe even just being a shoulder for somebody to lean on when they might be troubled. And I guess that's what I was thinking. The other side of that, instead of feeling guilty, which I was at a certain point, was to use it and to recognize that it's something that can be used in a really good way for others, for other people. That's all. But you already said that, so.
Perhaps not as well. Thanks, Chalet. Dylan, how you doing? Can I call on you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think, but I also think it is important to recognize that there is a privilege to being born and a privilege to being Buddha. And, a homeless person who's like, hello, fighting off, who doesn't have certain privileges. I think it's important. I don't think you have to feel guilty, but I do think it is an important recognition that, and I don't think that means you have to stop practicing, but it is, a certain level of compassion arises from the recognition. It doesn't have to be guilt, it can be compassion.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's another koan that popped up for me, Dylan, when you mentioned the homeless, right? And it goes something like, I could look it up, but it goes, I know this is pretty close. When you meet a man on the way, how do you greet him? Right? How do you greet a person on the way when you meet them, right? And what that points to is that, we're in a position of great privilege. We're sitting here on Zoom, right? Having this conversation. But everybody's on the way, and everybody is a person of enlightenment, right? And it is important to recognize that as well, and to, how do you deal with that when you walk by a homeless person? And this is something we've discussed too, Dylan, because our Zendo, when we're in a physical operation, is not far from Skid Row. And it's like, how do you take this practice into Skid Row. You know, in one form, we've gone and just served food. And that certainly is this, comes right out of this koan, mind is Buddha, right? Everything you do, right? And on another hand, are some of these tools and technologies, the Zazen, is there a way to communicate that to people that are not in a comfortable place? I mean, how do you say, okay, now sit down, cross your legs, close your eyes, start counting 1 to 10, you know, how does that work for somebody that, like the person riding by Lori and me today on their bike, pleading with us, I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry.
That's hard.
I'm so hungry. It was like Zen practice, repeated it 3 times. You know? So yeah, it's a great point, Dylan. Both sides of it. Philip, thanks for sharing. Your daughter.
She shares herself. Nada, amor. Eres linda. Ciao. Yeah. I guess it's my turn.
Well, it doesn't have to be. I saw your daughter come.
Yeah. No, I mean, I will say just something that, yeah, I really resonated with the Dharma talk. Thank you very much for it. It points towards this feeling or understanding or realization or perspective in my own practice that has slowly increased over the last few years, that like I had to let go of either saying that I'm doing such a good job or I'm doing such a bad job at that, like being a person and being alive, or I should feel guilty for this, or if I hate myself, I will do a better job. Like that's something that I just like the whole thing, the Buddha is mind. And then also, if you say what is Buddha, you are you're saying you're innocent while you're holding the loop. It's like you have to let go of that narrative that there's something wrong with you, and there's even that there's something wrong with this moment right now while we're in a pandemic. Yeah, there is something wrong, but this is also what the moment is unfolding, and it's always this. And it, of course, when they're suffering, like either like if my daughter's suffering, or people that I see, or my friends that I've seen suffering, or even myself, those are things that relate with compassion. But it's also it's also Buddha. The suffering is also Buddha. So that's my perspective on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, Art and Marsh, I guess I am going to call on you because you're the only 2 people with more years under your belt than I. And any perspective from your room, and is that a piece of art behind you? Like I always, every time I'm looking at it, going, what am I looking at?
The tools my grandfather used in Maine, and I I brought them to California and made an art piece out of it. So
beautiful, so beautiful.
Old
That's
tools.
amazing.
and it just it's a very important thing. We were just having a family Zoom before this, and I wanted to be sure the camera was facing that because their grandfather too, or their great grandfather, or their great great grandfather in this case. So so yeah, that practical takeaway. I'm going to stop being on Twitter right before bedtime. Thank you very much for reminding me of that. And and the other thing is just to be comfortable with being comfortable is probably a great takeaway from the talk. Thank you, Dan, so much.
You're welcome. And Art, I haven't heard your voice for a while. How you doing?
I'm doing all right for an old guy. I'm obviously the oldest of all of us. On the 20th, I'll be 85.
Amazing. Bravo.
Scary. It's scary to think about going to the hospital because if you're 85, they're not going to do anything for you. And I volunteer at a hospital at Kaiser, and I'm on their bioethics committee, and they've discussed this, and it's scary to hear them discussing this. But you know, we're here one day at a time, doing the best we can. That's all we can do. I've often, in speaking to groups, mentioned that I weighed 3 pounds when I was born, and this was before incubators. My chance of making it was 1 in 17. How did I end up making it to 85 or near 85 or whatever? My sister weighed 2 pounds when she was born. For the first year, she lived in a shoebox. And I'm not making that up. She's 82 now. You know, do what you can.
Beautiful.
That's amazing.
Beautiful. How about we nominate Art for a Dharma talk in the future?
Yes.
Here, 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 here.
That was a mic drop.
Thank you, Art.
Thank you all. I'm so happy to see you all.
Thank you, everybody. I mean, another big part of this, there's the practice is the practice, everything that you've all said. There's also all of us, right? And how we come together. Ken's not with us today, but he just celebrated his birthday in
73.
73?
I think.
Yeah, I think he's 73. He looks like he's 45 or something like that, you know? But so yeah, happy birthday to Ken. But thank you all, because, you know, every time we come together, it regenerates Buddha as well. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so why don't we
Okay.
close out with the vows, and then we'll have just a couple of announcements, and then we'll let everybody go.